record. Okay, communication 201 on Wednesday, June 6th. So, in light of one of the discussions on Monday night, I went through and I took a look at some of the daily checkpoints for the next week. Listen to them carefully. Take notes when you're doing them, because there's some subtle differences that you want to be aware of. Yep. Yep. Well, differences can be pretty subtle. The other thing is that I have gone through and made some changes to the assignment 2 for this week. And assignment 2 was to prepare a short presentation on a topic. Okay. And that's so what I did was I actually changed it up a little bit because I want you guys to practice with public speaking. So you're still going to write out a topic for something you'd like to present at work. It does not have to be related to your final speech. And there was a statement in there that it could be related to what you did last week. The problem is what you did last week isn't really related to what we're doing this week, so it doesn't. I took that one out as well. The other part is that I want you to write it out and submit it by the end of the week, and then on Monday night we'll just present them in class. Okay, and there will be the grade has been. I've inflated the points a little bit to reflect that presentation as well. So you're going to have a chance to at least 2 times in this mod make a presentation to the class, to the other 2 of us. But the issue is going to be let's work on the idea of public speaking. And get used to it. Now, I don't think either of you are going to have trouble. Both of you seem to be pretty comfortable, in front of a group, and that's fine. But practice, practice, practice. You can never get too much of that. So let's see. Um, 3 to 5. Yeah. For this week, just a shorty. Just a shorty, 400 to 500 words, ish. Yeah. So we have. Also, I have a 20-point assessment here, where you'll have a choice of about 10 or 12 questions, and you'll answer 4 of them. And it's just a short essay answers. So there's this divided into 2 sections. Each section has about 6 different questions that you can choose 2 of out of each section to write up, which means that you won't see a grade real fast because I will have to go through and read everything and evaluate it. Okay, so just warn you. But it's real short. It won't. If you've listened, if you've done the readings for the week and listened to the videos, you won't have any trouble with it. So, but it will require a little bit of writing. Okay, that's due by the end of the week. Pardon? Yeah.
But does it? Oh.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
So, and I'm going to increase the time so that you can work on it several times over the next, the next several days. So you don't have to do everything at once. Yeah. In fact, I will do that now. I will increase the time factor so that you can't run out, because right now you have 270 minutes, yeah, which is 4.5 hours. But I will just increase that to 2,700 minutes.
Okay.
Oh, it doesn't want to let me do that. What is this? I've never had any trouble doing that. Oh, no, I'll just take off the time limit. So I've taken off the time limit. So that actually is a better solution. So you'll have as much time as you need to work on that. Hello, Katie. So, so that's what's on tap for this week. Plus your, no problem.
Kimberly didn't make it then. You can't.
No, I have the ones I told you would be here.
I have to say something. It's what? I know. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we'll fix them. Okay.
I was about to suggest that she walk over here and sit here with her back to it. Now that she's alerted me to that, I'm in trouble. No, I'm only teasing. I'm not that worried about it. Yep. Yep. Good night, Katie. See you next week. Where are we? Okay. So that's been taken. There's no time limit. So you just go in and work on it. Let's see. I'll do one more thing. Make sure there are no mess ups. All right.
Okay.
That'll take care of it. All right. There. All right. Question, Jessica?
Yes.
Right. Mm-hmm. Remember that was? No, just tell me what your topic is first. Yeah. A very brief outline. Don't put a lot of, don't get worried about getting that done, since you have another one to do as well. And we will be presenting that in class on Monday of week 4. Or perhaps, actually that's part of your final, so it'll probably be Wednesday of week 4. And then the rest of the final will probably be short essay type questions that you'll do outside of class. Okay, so that should do it. So, any other questions? Okay, so actually, let's see. What I'm going to do is something just slightly different. Is I'm going to send you a link to get into the Zoom for tonight, because I'd like to show a video of just sort of a little diversion, but a video of a professional entertainer that we'll talk about. But I'd like to get you guys into I'm going to send you the link right now to the Zoom. And I'll just send it to the entire class, although I suspect nobody else is sitting around with bated breath waiting for me to send them a link.
Well, hey, mine was 40 minutes.
I don't think so, because they haven't written to me and said that they're waiting.
But I think Karen also, there was some actual might not have called there, but I was trying to figure out, and I was like, I better just get started on it. So then like around 7 o'clock, they finally emailed me back the rest of the here's the link. And I zoomed in, and I was pretty much already done. Everybody else was done. Like, oh. Zooming is I don't know.
We would prefer you didn't. I would much rather have you right in the room with me, because then we have much more of a direct interaction. We have been asked to be available to Zoom when someone has a legitimate excuse for not being here. The problem is that there are some people that don't feel it's necessary for them to really try to be here. And others that just don't seem to care one way or the other. So I've sent you the link so you can cut and paste it and go ahead and log into the class, into the Zoom session, so that I can pull up this video that I wanted to show. And if you'll let me know when, well, I'll find out when you're in, because it'll tell me. Okay, this is have either of you heard of a pianist by the name of Victor Borge? Victor Borge was trained as a classical pianist. He's Danish. He is a tremendous pianist. He's also quite a comedian. You're all so that's a picture of Borge right there. And it's just a well-done presentation. And it's an example of how you can use a lot of humor, especially when that's the goal. Remember, we talked about humor is sometimes difficult, and the use of humor. Did I tell you the story about the Japanese?
I think you did. Yeah, I mean,
Possibly in algebra. I don't know. But anyway, an American comedian in the 1960s was on tour. He went to Japan, and he was in a big theater, one of those Tokyo, Osaka, and he was doing his shtick. And the Japanese just roaring. And he was so good. I mean, it was going so well. Every time he told a joke, the audience was breaking. And so they were at the end, he was just really high. He was just really psychologically up. He said to the people there, because he had a translator. I mean, most Japanese in the 1960s spoke no English. Now many of them do, but at that time they didn't. So he steps backstage and he's talking to people. He said, "Boy, I just wowed the audience. They just thought I was funny." And his translator looked at him and said, "Not really. When you'd finish the joke, I'd say, 'Joke over, laugh now.'"
it's super.
Pull him down.
Yeah, you sort of laughed to your own devices. That's why they were laughing, obviously, just to make you feel good.
Now, you have to understand, Victor Borge is some of his humor is just meant to be corny. But he makes a lot of jokes about music, and he is you'll see that he's an absolutely tremendous pianist. But he can stop something and just make some of what he's going to say in this. This is an old recording. Some of it is a bit on the politically incorrect side. Just leave it at that. But there's nothing nasty. I mean, there's no profanity. Never entered into it. And he doesn't. I don't think there's a mean bone in the man's body. He's long gone, by the way. But I've known of this man for a good portion of my life, and I've always enjoyed his stuff because it was just plain silly and fun. And it really, in this case, it's a good way to show how somebody can stand up in front of an audience and just crack them up with doing something nothing. He has something called punctuated language, where he makes a sound for periods and commas and question marks, and he just puts this into his stories, and the stories have no meaning. It's just listening to him make these weird noises and have fun. So it's just a good example. So let's hear. I'd better go back and make sure that the sound is on. And also, what's that? Just a minute, I'll go get a better.
You got a weird echo.
Yeah. I think my microphone hasn't been muted. Isn't that weird?
You gotta fix it. That's better. Besides.
Maybe you better mute your microphone as well.
It's mine. It's yours.
Are we ready now? Now we'll try this.
I'm going to show the print because it has been a long day and I have been breathing on it. You hear the piano playing? Too bad. Well, it is always a big question for me to show something to play, but I think I will talk a little bit about Mozart, the Danish composer, and Christian Mozart. Mozart, as you know, was only from here on. He was what we call a butler. And in spite of that, physical handicap, the scholars insist that he was very happy married. But this is what God does. He went all the way to the throne. I spent hours on the piano. You didn't make me at one. Why not? I thought, well, if the piano was not there, I would go on with it. He was walking back Actually, it's an action for which I have no choice during many years of experience. The last question was in 1976, and the time where I already was. There are three things. There are three things I can never remember. Four. One of them, Vietnam War, by the Munich War. Will you hear this? That is the main thing. That's when you hear this. There's something wrong. Because that's so much. Oh, I don't know. I was thinking about Mozart. I'm going to play opera in four flats because he had to move 3 times. It's a short opera. Actually, Mozart wrote it, but he had Salieri's name on it. That's not the one. I wonder if that's in the story. Many people don't know what is in the story. Unfortunately, I have to be one. It is a very short opera. You only one act to get to the curtain rises, otherwise you couldn't see it. On stage, a 2 large trees on this side and on the other side. First, the tenor comes in, people go to the people from bar. When she comes in later, she can't run it because he has. Now, she hides behind the other tree, but she won't be surprised if I comes in later and they don't go to the other. It's very difficult. Now the chorus comes in, but nobody knows why. What God is there. Yeah. Now the father comes in, her father comes in, he's very active because he doesn't even want to be in the opera. Yeah. He hates opera, he hates it, and he decides he dies, and you don't want to hard on it. I think it's another way to just hear the overture, but as soon as the door is over, they were but not this footstep, but he enters the office of it. He walks that way. you, I'm telling you. I was in the area, man. If you want to fill the park with the problem, you want to fill it, you overflow the big problem is about 4.5 feet tall, lying down. Here I am, the thing of mine. Well, boy, this is part of the body, other thing will come heard of. She got behind the tree there around for 3 weeks. Now I took the rapid and I brought it to the call and been in the house and the parrot comes in. Oh, God. Now the boss comes in. Maybe the boss. When I was about it, they're not doing all you want to do. Die by stabbing themselves without the tree.
So that may not be the humor that you're used to. But it is something that is very, very common. He was a very well respected entertainer. But it gives you an idea as to what happens, how a person can use, obviously humor and music. He's a very serious musician, but he introduced a lot of American audiences to a lot of music. Obviously, he's making fun of opera, and comedians always like to make fun of opera. It's been sort of like a sport. But his use of body language, it's our facial expressions. So the nonverbal approaches that he was using to a number of his jokes very clearly was a part of his routine. And this may not be the best of his routines, but it is one that I just ran into the other day when I was wandering around on the web, looking for something that might be amusing to show up in class. So, it's right at 7, so why don't we go ahead and take a break. And then after that, I've got an activity that would be far better if we had at least 5 people, but we'll have to do it with just the 3 of us. So, take a break. And, if you have any questions or thoughts, please let me know. You may want to go ahead and pull out of this Zoom, by the way, because we're getting a lot of feedback from computers. So that should be all right.
Alright, we'll meet back.
All righty. And that just, ugh, it was a horrible place to be.
Oh.
It is, it's very hard, especially as a new parent. My son was in ICU for a week. so-
Yeah,
Hmm.
Yeah.
That's really, really tough. I had a really, really good childhood. It was really easy.
For children,
Sure.
perfect.
It was so nice.
yeah.
It's good.
Our first one slept in late. She was 10 days overdue.
Yeah, my son as well. My son was
So-
due on the 6th. He was supposed to be due pretty much on my birthday. We were supposed to have kind of the same birthday, but then he's late. So I was like, all right, so we'll have separate birthdays. Did
Yeah.
you guys get your kids circumcised? Because I hadn't even really thought about it until they asked me in the hospital.
We have 2 girls, so the answer is no.
Real.
You got him circumcised? I figured most people, like the
Mm.
majority. get-
Most do, although that's coming under question now.
Really?
And I was just reading, maybe Denmark is actually moving against circumcision.
Why? What is their main reasoning?
There's a certain level of infection that comes from it.
I thought that was like the main reason for,
Yeah, there's a certain level of infection that is from a non-circumcised.
yeah, it's like, it's dirtier, it's harder to clean, it's like
Yeah.
more chance for those infections and stuff. But I felt really, really bad after I got him circumcised and he came back to me a crying baby, like a day old. Oh my God, I like regretted that.
Yeah,
decision.
one of the major issues is they used to say, "Oh, their nervous systems aren't developed. He can't feel it."
That's
That's
obviously bullshit.
yeah, that's absolutely untrue. But
He's very upset baby.
yeah, sure.
And that's really tough, but that was kind of a difficult decision that I kind of had to make quickly. I did not prepare for making that decision.
No, you don't, and in fact, they don't prepare you for it. They should have, said that. From ultrasound, they suspected you were going to have
Yeah.
a boy anyway, even if you didn't have any genetic testing done. So they should have brought that up.
Yeah, I definitely did not even think about it. Not even
Why
in the
would you?
slightest.
Your concern is having a healthy baby.
Yeah, there's a lot going on, right?
Right, yeah.
You just had a kid. It's a
Yeah.
big moment in your life, I guess. So I definitely didn't even think about it, but it's tough to like watch their pain that young, you know? You're like,
Yeah. Well, our second was actually born in an ambulance
was she?
on New Year's Eve.
That's very interesting.
And she was 7 weeks premature. So fortunately, our OB was on duty at the hospital that night, which was really good. And Iro was really trying to stop everything. He was trying to, slow down the process and prevent an early birth. But Cherise wanted out. So he finally gave up, and we were in North Carolina at the city hospital in Durham, county hospital actually in Durham, and the ICU is at Duke. So they transferred her, and so along the way, my wife said to the drivers, "This baby is coming." "Well, we're hurrying." "No, you don't understand. This baby is coming." So they slam on the brakes and stop, deliver the baby, and found out later where they had stopped was in front of a restaurant where some friends of ours were there for their New Year's Eve party, and they were standing outside looking at this ambulance thinking, "Oh, some poor guy's had a heart attack." It was our baby being born. But there are these guys. So the EMTs on New Year's Eve, they don't see babies being born. They see accidents and drunks and overdoses and heart attacks and all sorts of things. So the guy is sitting there saying, "It's a baby." And finally my wife had to say, "Is she breathing?" And the answer, of course, was yes. So, but that was kind of funny. But then, she was early, so we got to deal with that. That was, you remember, not an easy time. So, but she's fine.
Good.
She's my Egyptologist author, so, you know, what can I say? All right. Well, I just heard from Erica, and I don't think she's going to be able to get online. I was hoping she could, because I wanted to include her in our little activity. So we're going to have to do this anyway. So I'm going to ask you to draw straws, flip coins, whatever, but one of you needs to leave the room.
Leave.
Leave the room. Just out in the hallway.
Well, I need
Just-
some water.
Yeah, well, go get some water and close the door to the room,
Close.
right? Close the
Okay.
door to the room. Not going to tell you what we're going to do yet.
Wait, maybe I just want to be on the other side of this. Okay, goodbye.
Okay. So since this is listening week, and I'm sorry we don't have more people to listen, but that's all right. I'm going to read a passage to you.
Okay.
And then we'll call Jessica back in, and you will tell her the story you heard in the passage.
Repeating what you're saying?
Yeah. Or whatever you
Like that
remember.
telephone.
Yeah, sort of. It's called the Rumor Clinic, is what we call this game. You ready? Marvella had to get the courses she needed for graduation since this was her last term at school. She was a pre-med major, and the requirements were very numerous and specific for that major, so she didn't have much room for substitutions. She had already met most college requirements, but she still needed one more historical course and one more humanities course. Otherwise, what she needed were 2 advanced biology courses, and both were already full, and 1 particle chemistry course, which she dreaded since chemistry was particularly rough science for her. Marvella knew what she needed, but her advisor was not in his office, and she didn't know how to cut through the red tape to get the classes she needed.
Okay.
Okay. So what you're going to do is repeat that story to Jessica when she returns.
As much on key as possible.
Right. This is a lot more fun when I have 5 or 6 students doing this.
Yeah.
Because what we normally do is, okay, you've heard it. If Erica had gotten online, Erica would have heard it and got to repeat it to you or Jessica, one of you. And then that person gets to repeat it without any input from anyone else. And we see how it changes on down the line. It's sort of like telephone,
Yeah.
but a little more complicated because in telephone, it was just a short phrase.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is a story. I heard the. So, but the whole idea is listening. Oh, that's right. There was a banana in that basket, wasn't there? Yeah. Good for you. Good for you. Potassium's good for you. All right, now.
I have to tell you a story.
Right.
Marvella was going to school. Blowing it already. Was going to school at med major. She was in her last week and she needed to get third last week. She needed to get like 2 classes done. Algebra and chemistry. And algebra was already full. She couldn't do it. Chemistry, she had to talk to her advisor to see if she could get in with it, and he wasn't available. We had too much conversation between both.
Okay, what's more?
Listening.
Okay.
There was a lot said in the story that he told me. And it was a lot more than what I said.
Actually, you did pretty well. The last time I did this, the very first person that I read it to was on Zoom, was zooming in because she just had a C-section. So she wasn't coming to class that month, and that was okay with us.
Yeah.
But she also never missed a class. So, but I read this to her and then called in. I had 6 other students, I guess, that day, 7 other, maybe. So they were all out in the hallway. We called the first one in. And the very first rendition had maybe a third of the information that you had.
Wow.
And so, and you can imagine it went downhill from there.
Yeah.
Because at one point she looked at me and said, "Am I getting this right?" And I said, "It's your story." Because I can't interfere. The object is to show how things change, because you got the gist. And in most cases, people would get the general gist of the story, but they'd get all the details wrong. You even got the name right, which no one did.
What's her name? Yeah.
Marvella.
Yeah, Marvella.
I totally would have messed that up. And she was a med major. And it was
Pre-med.
algebra and chemistry.
Well, actually, I'll read it.
Chemistry.
I'll read everything I read to Carol Ann.
Okay.
Marvella had to get the courses she needed for graduation since this was her last term at school. She was a pre-med major, and the requirements were very numerous and specific for that major, so she didn't have much room for substitutions. She had already met most college requirements, but she still needed 1 more historical course and 1 more humanities course. Otherwise, what she needed were 2 advanced biology courses, and both were already full, and 1 particle chemistry course, which she dreaded since chemistry was a particularly rough science for her. Marvella knew what she needed, but her advisor was not in his office, and she didn't know how to cut through the red tape to get the classes she needed. So you got much of it right. And, you know, what the interesting thing is that you remember the chemistry.
Well, I think that's pretty understandable since you spoke most of chemistry. You spoke several sentences
A
discussing.
couple of sentences with chemistry in it, exactly right, yeah. So you heard that twice. You only heard biology once, and humanities and history once. So repetition is a lot of it. What this is really showing us, this little exercise, just a fun little game. This little exercise is showing us is that when we think we're listening, we don't hear as much as we think. Actually, we hear it all. That's a physiological process. But what happens when we listen to anything is the first stage is it goes into short-term memory. That can maybe last, in some cases, 15, 20 seconds. And we had another, at least that long of other conversation while you were out. So that goes away. We lose a great portion of it right away. Then later, what's left gets integrated into longer term memory. Some people are more efficient at getting their long-term memory, but still, most people, even the most efficient people at transferring short-term to long-term without real training in it, maybe get 30%, maybe 35 at the max.
Now, what if you're allowed to write notes? Do you think you'd be able to get a higher percentage of information?
Yeah, writing notes. Here's one of the things. The brain learns in lots of ways. We all know that we learn by seeing, we learn by doing, we learn by hearing. Smell actually is something we learn with. We learn what smells bad, what smells good, what smells dangerous. Okay. Whenever we combine 2 different ways of learning, then we exponentially increase what we retain. And taking notes is one of the reasons we encourage people to take notes, is because that act of translating that into something that you can read. Now, maybe no one else can read your writing. I mean, I think that's the case with my writing in many cases, but you can, right? And people close to you who have been looking at your writing all your life can usually read it. Except for my older daughter who writes so small I need a magnifying glass to see it. That's a different story. But that act, that very act, combining two different modes of learning and integrating exponentially increases it. Have you ever noticed that you can't memorize a poem, but you'll hear a song once and know it? That's because we're using two parts of our brain. There's that verbal integration part of what we're hearing. And then there is the musical part, which is another aspect of learning. It puts another layer on it. It puts a rhythm to it, a sequence to it. And that's why people can't memorize doodly unless you put it to music. And then they've got it.
Yeah, like the ABCs.
Yeah, exactly. You learn these songs, and every now and again I'll start hearing something, and I'll hear a piece of music I haven't heard in 50 or 60 years, but I'll hear it and I can sing along with it. I was on an airplane one time and I just I plugged in to the radio, the audio program, and just randomly selected some music to listen to, and it turned out to be LeAnn Rimes singing Patsy Cline. Now, Patsy Cline was a country singer in the 50s, and she was a particular favorite of my mother. And so LeAnn Rimes is sitting there singing, covering all of these old Patsy Cline songs, and I was singing along with it because I remembered all those songs from my childhood. And it just amazes me, how many things have I studied academically that I don't remember? But I can remember this because it was a dual learning process, and listening and learning. That's why art and movement are so critical to education, because in reality, we do integrate better when we are involved in doing an activity that teaches us something. Writing our letters teaches us the alphabet. And that physical act of having to make that shape enhances the learning. So anytime you can learn, anytime you take notes, the chances are you're going to learn more. The people that are most effective, and I discovered this years and years ago when I was in graduate school. I was taking nothing but chemistry course after chemistry course, and I decided I wanted something different to do. And so one of the classes being offered, I was at the University of Colorado, and one of the classes that was offered at the graduate level was a class called plant ecology. And I just sort of saw this, and the words that leapt off the page were weekly trip into the mountains for a field trip. And I said, I want to take that class. Get out of the lab one afternoon a week and go up into the mountains. What a tough gig, right? So I get in there, and the instructor tells us the rules, okay? We have to memorize terms. We have to memorize a lot of words and plant physiology terms and all these ecology terms. And she said, I'm going to give you definitions and you'll repeat them on your exams, and you have to repeat them word for word the way I give them to you. And I thought, well, that's kind of silly, but okay, those are the rules. All right. So I would take notes in her class, and then I would go home and I'd rewrite them. So I was actually doing them twice, writing them twice. And when I rewrote them, I would, I used a lot of abbreviations. I would write out the words that were the abbreviations when I was taking notes, right? I'd write out those abbreviations. So along come time to take the exam, first exam, and we took the exam, and everybody, it was a written exam. We had to write out all this stuff and hand it in to the instructor. We get back to the next class, and she is in a foul mood. And she just lights into the class. She got so mad at them because all of her biology students failed the exam and the chemist got 100%. And it was because I listened to what she said. And my strategy was a strategy that used both visual and auditory and movement to learn. And it just went in and stayed. So anytime you can do that, if you had taken notes, even just a few, You would-
Points, yeah.
you would
Like
have,
the classes.
and you got most of it. As I say, you got a lot more than my last class did. It got quite amusing after a while. I had to work to keep a straight face because they really botched it up, and it was kind of fun. And when I read it back, everybody was sort of, their eyes are about this big as they're saying, "Dude, is that really what you read?" And then I got the confirmation over the Zoom from the other student. So, the issue is when we are listening itself, hearing, of course, is just physiology. Listening is how do we integrate this? And so any strategy that and some people do better with some strategies than others. I met a guy that never took a note in a class. What he did was he would construct pictures in his mind of what was being said. And he could spit this stuff back out practically verbatim just by the pictures that his brain would create. But I never saw him take a single note. He didn't even write down dates of assignments that were due. So, obviously the way his brain worked was very different from the way mine worked, but it worked. And it was his strategy. And it was a very effective one for him. So, the thing about listening is exactly that. So let's take a look. Do you have any questions or comments on that? It would have been a lot more fun if we'd had 3 or 4 more people in the class, but.
It would be more fun, but that game reminds me a lot of telephone. Do you guys remember telephone?
Yep, yep. That's the first thing Carol Ann said.
Telephone.
And it is the difference between telephone though is usually it's a short phrase, a sentence.
Everybody can do a short phrase or sentence.
But it still changes.
It does still change after time through interpretation of each like person that goes through changes a little bit, and then
Yeah.
more and more and more, and then all of a sudden it's saying the same thing.
We did a similar game with some young people one time, and these were 12 to 15-year-olds, and we had everyone go around and they'd have a piece of paper and they'd put it against somebody's back and they would use their fingers to trace out a shape, and they were told what the shape was, that they would use. And the interesting thing, and so the first person would write out the shape, and it was usually nothing real complicated. It wasn't like a big, giant Chinese character with about 23 lines on it or anything. It's usually fairly simple shape, and some of them were curves and some were straight lines, and just whatever. And the interesting part was to see that then the first person who had it traced onto their back would then take a blank piece of paper and try to duplicate it on the person in front of them.
Oh, that's very interesting.
Yeah, so it really had a lot to do with how do you perceive, obviously everybody had to be comfortable with somebody touching them like that, but how do you perceive that input? And so when we get down to the end and we'd see these what people started and what they ended with, it always was kind of an eye-opener because of course they were almost always totally unrelated.
Wow.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny. I have kind of noticed it, like like especially with your back, sometimes where you think something is, like let's say like a mole or something like that, And like where you think it is and where it actually is, or somebody puts their finger on it and they're like, this is where your mole is. I'm like, I didn't think it, I thought it was more like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I just think that things are a little bit different because you don't know your back very well. Can't
You
see
don't,
it.
and of course, when you're trying to reach it, it's very different
Yeah,
because you're limited then by shoulder movement, your own arm length,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You're a lot of limitations there. But yeah, that's not unusual.
Yeah.
And but the whole idea of how information is transferred is a whole realm of communication. Let's see. Oh, have you done the? No, that's tomorrow. Okay, I'll be interested in seeing what you think of tomorrow's daily checkpoint. Because all of them have videos that work, fortunately, as opposed to last mod when we had one or two that didn't. But all of them have seem to have videos that work. So I'll be interested in seeing what you think of that, because it really goes into, it's more about listening, because it actually is going into something that's in a totally different class than this, that communication. It's our ethics class. But it'll be interesting to see how you do on that. But listening and interpretation really are critical, and it's one of the reasons I like to do this is because when you are the one communicating, it's one thing for me to be reading a prepared script, because I read this exactly. I didn't try to reinterpret it. It's another thing if you are if you're going up in front of a group of people and delivering a public address of some sort. You can't obviously be sitting there reading. Too many people do that. It drives me crazy. It's one thing to have a few notes and to occasionally glance down and, oh yeah, I need to cover point number 3. I missed it. It's one thing to do that. It's another thing to sit and just read a presentation. I just saw that recently. Several people actually it was at our graduation. Everybody that spoke was reading, and I thought,
These are terrible speakers.
Well, the problem is they weren't necessarily terrible speakers, but they were obviously reading. They weren't actually talking, because there's the students out there like you guys are, and they're doing this. They're not. There's no eye contact, or they would, most of the time they'd look up once or twice, but that's not the idea. If you're going to be speaking, if you're delivering a complicated scientific paper at a meeting, you're going to do, you have to even do better than that. You saw my discussion the first week about my analytical chemistry teacher. You can imagine sitting through his class was excruciating. And to this day, I remember that. I mean, this is a lot of years ago. And to this day, I remember being absolutely dreading going to class because it was so boring, And at that time we had lectures, 2 hours of that class was 2 hours of lectures a week and then 4 hours of lab a week. The lab was so much more fun. And the lectures were useless. So when people do that, when you're delivering complex scientific data, you're even going to do better than that. You're going to use a PowerPoint. You're going to have points on that. You're going to look up and you're going to know your topic. That's why everyone says the same thing. If you're going to give a presentation, practice it several times. Because if you practice it once, there's a good chance you're going to forget something. If you practice it 3 or 4 times, rather than get bored with it, you're going to get familiar with it. If you try practicing it 10 times, you may get bored with it, and then you will mess up. If you're bored with your own talk, that's just horrible. But the issue is that you need to know what you're doing and need to engage with your audience. Sitting, I dearly love our faculty here and our staff. We have a really good faculty here, but it just drives me crazy when I see people that should know better just reading a talk. If you don't know it any better than that, well, you should have practiced. And some people, I don't worry about that so much in most of my classes, but this class I actually will worry about that. I will consider that because that's what it's for. But in my other classes, when people have to make a presentation, I'm less concerned with how they do it than that they have actually done the work to get the information. And I've actually had some students that were almost physically ill at the prospect of standing up in front of a group. And I made the mistake one time of really pushing someone to do it. And she ended up in tears. And I was ashamed of myself. And I've never done it again. If someone insists I can't do it, I'll say, well, how about if, on break you present just to me? They're usually fine with that. And then they've got it done. And a little bit of immunization against that feeling. And that's all. But here, it's the whole idea, because you will have to do that. No matter where you are, ultimately, you're going to be standing in front of a group of people, or even just one person, and presenting. If you're a salesperson, and I don't know if any of you are interested in sales, you may end up there. You never can tell, especially if it's something you really believe in. It's easy to sell something you believe in. But if it's something, but that a sales call is a public speaking engagement. I mean, the whole idea is persuasion. To go back to last week's stuff, or this week's, persuasive talk, persuasive speech. And in order to do that, you have to engage the audience and make them think that you are, first off, you're the expert, but also that you're really engaged with them rather than just delivering a script, sounding like Robbie the Robot. You just can't do that. So that's one way of doing it. But I really do believe, and movement. We're gonna partially switch to some nonverbal issues, because nonverbal communication is actually a lot of the stuff next week. When you do the first assignment next week, which is basically to do the readings and the videos and write that up, give me a 2-page summary. There's a bunch there about nonverbal communication, but there's one thing that's actually missing, and I mentioned that last week in Wednesday's class when we talked about language, the choice of language, and whether things were racist or sexist or whatever. An aspect of nonverbal communication is our choice of words. If you're talking with your friends and you let slip a few profanities, nobody's going to care. If you're talking to a professional group, you don't do that, right? And I can't imagine either of you would, talking professionally. I don't see that. In class or talking amongst our friends, things slip out that we might not normally say in front of our mother, but it does come out. But our choice of words says a lot about who we are. And that's a part of nonverbal. I consider that nonverbal, even though it's words and it's spoken, but it is a choice. It's a way we act. So the nonverbal includes body language, and body language has a lot of components. There's kinesics, which is how we move, hand gestures, etc. There's vocalics, which is tone of voice. That's another nonverbal. You can say things in many ways, right? One of my favorites is, "Let's go eat, Grandma," or "Let's go eat, Grandma." Right? It all depends on how it comes out. So things that we would not even think about just sometimes come out funny. But there's lots of ways of doing that. And vocalics, the choice of tone, the choice of, you saw with Victor Borge, there was some timing issues. Timing is critical in a presentation. It doesn't have to be a comedy act, although it's really critical, comedy act. And every performer, whether they're stage or screen or street performer, knows that timing is really the key. I know I've spent some time, I've had the fun of spending some time with a guy. I can't call him a friend or anything, but we've been together at some conferences, and his name is Michael Pritchard. And Pritchard is this 350-pound, 6'6" guy who is a stand-up comedian, a probation officer, and a counselor. He's won the stand-up competition in San Francisco several times, but he tells wonderful human stories. He does a lot of work with Downs kids, and he tells this wonderful story about getting one of the, one of the sort of mid-level ability Downs kids, because there's a whole spectrum of Downs, from people that really can't do much of anything to people who you look at him and you say, well, that looks like it might be a Downs person, and you just don't see it, other than that. But there's this one kid, and so he's relatively, median, high level, and Michael placed him in a McDonald's in San Francisco, and he was running the cash register, and in come these two yuck high school kids and take a look at him, and they recognized that he was a Downs kid. And hey, look behind the register, it's a retard. And it started off on that, yuck. And so he says, so the kid says, can I help you? What would you like? And so they said, oh, great. Yeah, I'd like a this and a that and a this. And he says, okay. And he repeated, oh, the retard got it right. And then he gave him the total for the bill. Hey, the retard can count. Ha, ha, ha. And then brought them their food, handed it to him, and said, thanks, retard. And he head out the door. And this kid turns around and looks at Michael and says, simple things abuse simple people. So again, timing. He was very calm. And Michael tells the story far better than I do, along with the one he was talking about, this kid that he was working with. It was an inner city black kid who was just really had an attitude. And he was angry, and not without reason in many cases, right? He was really angry. And so suddenly he just got really mad one day, and he looked at Michael and says, I am so tired of getting orders, I'm going to join the Marines. You tell that story, and there's a moment of, did I really hear that? And the timing of it is what's critical, and the irony of that, and it's the way you tell your stories. You can inject humor into many different places. I've actually met Michael several times at the International Conference on Humor and Creativity in the Workplace. We call it the Humor Conference. And so he and I have been there several times together. So I've heard many of the stories and other people talking about just how they do how they introduce this. And some of the presentations are absolutely hilarious, as you can imagine. And some of them are actually extremely serious about the uses of humor. It's kind of hard to think about humor as a serious topic, but it actually can be. But humor can be introduced. And so our language, and a lot of it's through timing, a lot of it's through the tone of voice we use when we're talking. We all know that. When we're irritated and we snap at somebody, our tone of voice tells them, you know, you just pissed me off. Just got a stupid message on my phone, on my computer that said I had to restart Outlook. What can I say? Anyway, but another is facial expression. You saw that with Victor Borge, his facial expressions, his body language. He'd sit down at the piano and then he'd stand up. So that was the disconnect. That's part of that shtick. And you know there's a joke coming, so you're paying attention. Maybe you didn't find the jokes as funny as I do because I know the humor of the music. When he starts talking about Hans Christian Mozart, you know, Mozart was Wolfgang Amadeus. And he was here to here, you know, just silly things, but nonetheless, you get it, right? And it's part of the language, part of the body language. The other thing is just general movements, facial expression. You shouldn't look like a grinning idiot in front of a group of people, but you also shouldn't look like you're about death warmed over, right? So you should have what we call a neutral or pleasant expression on your face when you're doing a presentation. Otherwise, people are saying, well, what's he so mad about? You know? Or, God, that's an ugly person. Because ugly expressions are exactly that. Can be the handsomest man, most beautiful woman you ever met, but their expression can make them really not very attractive. So you have that. A smile now and again always is more attractive. Now, you're not going to be smiling as you're delivering someone that says, your mother died. That would be kind of inappropriate. But you're also not going to be scowling. You know, you're not going to want to stress anybody out. So it's really kind of thinking about how you come across. Dress. There's Victor Borge wearing a tux. Well, performance pianists wear tuxes, and that's what he is. But in other circumstances, you don't see them. I mean, Steve Martin plays the banjo, and he's a very good banjo player. That was part of his original act. And he'd come out wearing just a sport jacket and a tie, playing the banjo, because that was the uniform. Stand-up comics don't generally wear tuxes. But that, again, is part of Borge's stick. I mean, you don't expect a stand-up comic to be wearing those clothing. And how you dress is also part of nonverbal communication. When he comes out there wearing that tux, eventually he's going to be on the piano. He's going to be doing something to be worth wearing it. But if you're going to go out and juggle, you wouldn't wear a tux. You might if you were doing that, say, at some big reception. I saw a recording of a juggler, and I mean, he was juggling some very amazing things, wearing a tux. But who was he performing for? President Reagan and his wife, the entire cabinet. So it was a very formalized occasion. So it was appropriate. But if he were just doing a normal act on stage, he wouldn't be wearing that. So, so your audience is also where you are. When I've had to make presentations before large groups, I've always worn a suit. If I'm lucky, you guys will never see me in a suit, because I swore I'd stop wearing them. I do wear a tie for graduation. That's my one concession. But the school wants me to be more dressed than I am, wants me to be wearing a tie. I just won't do it. Well, I've worked three-piece suits for 20 years, and I said, done. That shtick is over. I'm out of that business. But if I go someplace, I made a presentation before a large meeting last summer. I wore my suit. It was appropriate. Most of the audience was dressed at least in slacks and formal shirts. Most of them weren't wearing ties, but I maybe saw out of the entire meeting, I maybe saw 4 or 5 pair of blue jeans in probably a couple of thousand people. So it depends on your audience too. So the nonverbal part, we'll go more into that. I'm going to try and find a nonverbal game that we can play. Maybe next week. Pardon?
That's not purple.
It definitely should be. But the problem is that your body language is so controlled. Good poker players have no body language.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
No expressions. You don't see them pick up their cards and go, unless it's part of an act. But yeah, poker is a different beastie. But the thing about body language is we can say a lot without a single sound coming out of our throats. Our eyes say a lot. Eyes can be very expressive. You can say an awful lot with just that, just moving your eyebrows. If I did that to my daughter today, I think. She spent the night at our house last night because I picked her up at the airport at midnight. This morning we were talking, and I just looked at her at one point and I just raised an eyebrow, and she knew exactly what I meant. Now, of course, she has 30 odd years of experience with me, but she knew what I meant. She knew that I was saying, "Are you sure you want me to believe that?" It's a lot we can say without saying a word. A flare of a nostril. I knew a guy who could wiggle his ears, and you could always tell when he was excited because his ears would wiggle. Really, really strange to watch. I mean, really, literally, they would wiggle. It was sort of like watching a rabbit. But it said his mood. He showed his mood that way. The set of our jaw can tell. Somebody says something and you just see that expression, the jaws tighten, and they're not happy with what they just heard necessarily. There are just lots and lots of things we can do. The way we walk, a good one. We used to have, I don't know if you guys started here when we still had them. We used to have these little wheeled podium things here in the rooms. I hate them because I consider them a barrier. When I teach, especially in the medical classes, and when I teach some other things, I like to move around the room and write on the board and just be in a different position. A class like this, it's hard to, I'm not going to write a whole lot of this stuff on the board. I mean, I don't know that it's necessary, but this is a much more, I'd call it sedentary class in a lot of ways, because until we get into the body language thing, there's really not a whole lot to demonstrate. So we use a lot of gestures. And they can express a lot of things. Excuse me, I'm still recovering from last night. They can express a lot of things. We can, and they're not meant to be so much expressions, but as a way of emphasizing certain points. And I don't mean, people that stand up there and say, well, first we got to do this, and second we got to, I don't like that. Nor do I like people that stand up and point to people in the audience. An instructor who can't name his students, if I want Jessica to say something, I will use the name. I won't say you. Now, one example, one change in that is in an emergency. I might just look up and say, go call 911. And the reason is that if I say someone call 911, no one will do it. Everybody will assume they're doing it. So there's a point at which body language is critical. And if we were in a room like this and we had an emergency and I needed that, I would say Jessica called because I know Jessica. Or I'd say Carol Ann because I know your name. But in a crowd, point to a person. Yes, it's not polite. But when it's emergency, politeness is not your first, your first instinct, right? And most people understand. Okay, I'll call. So I don't like pointing. Pointing fingers is kind of rude. If we're looking at something and I'm pointing to, say, that piece of paper on the right up there that says medical jam, that's useful because it shows you where I'm looking. Because if I just look over there and say, piece of paper on the wall, it doesn't help. And so, in that case, the body language is really directive, right? It is directive. So body language is saying, over there, that piece of paper. If you're watching where my finger is pointing, you're going to see 4 pieces of paper. And you're going to say, okay, whatever the one he's talking about, then give it a title, and there you go. You got it. But, we have lots of ways of doing that. And gestures in this society are becoming interesting. Driving down the road, you blow your horn at somebody, you're liable to get a gesture. Not the one you necessarily want. When what you're really looking for is ooh, sorry, because they just tried to hit you, right?
That's what just happened to me.
Yeah.
People are rude.
Well, yeah.
They are.
Well, and there's a part of the lack of communication in our society.
Well, when people are behind the wheel, they don't hold themselves accountable to their actions because you never have to see that person in person. If you know what I mean? So they're just excessively rude.
Yeah, they can get away with it. It's like the internet.
Yeah, you just drive away and you never see them again.
It's like the internet.
Yeah, it is like the internet. People are excessively rude on the internet too.
People feel they can say whatever they want because
No consequences.
they're half a world away. You're not going to poke them in the nose. They'll say things that they would never say to your face because they know they know that saying it to your face is wrong. They also know that writing it on the internet is wrong, but they can't get caught. Yeah. So one of the reasons that I never read comments on anything I read on the internet, if there's a comment line down below, I never read them because of exactly that, because the chances are you're going to find something that is not communicating anything of use, just showing how badly mannered some people are. Yeah. Why get offended? Why bother? But Yeah, you talk about people being rude on the road. Yesterday, I just about got hit twice in less than a minute. The first person making a left turn from the right lane of a 3-lane wide road, and the next person making a right turn from the left lane right in front of me.
They had to switch spots.
Yeah, but I like the front end of my car to be remaining intact.
Yeah.
But and I blew the horn twice. One person just acted like they didn't hear it, which is probably the best way to respond to that when you know you're wrong, really. I'll hurry up and get away, you'll never see me again. And the other one used his digital communicator. So I thought, yeah, okay. Tells me a lot about you. But it was just really, those are the things that happen. And, part of me says, how soon is it going to be until we start hearing about people shooting each other when somebody blows a horn on the road? Because lots of crazies out there.
And there are a lot of people that carry guns in their cars.
Yeah, and most of them are perfectly fine.
Yeah, they do. A lot of them have their,
Yep, most of them are good, responsible gun owners who would never think about doing something like that.
Yeah.
But there are just enough crazies that you can't take for granted that guy's not going to be one. So it is kind of weird, and there's part of the lack of communication in this world, and it's also, I think, a sign of one of the components of the previous communications class that we used to teach was interpersonal communication. We just don't have time for that here, although I think there's a video or two of it in the shell. But interpersonal communication, which is really, we're getting close enough.
I was saying if they
Christy was just wondering if these things are, because back in the faculty office area, back where Christy and so forth are, we turned the thermostat up all the time, and then it just seems to reset every day.
I think it's different up there than because I have complained the last 2 days that I came in. I finally brought a jacket.
Yeah, that's
but
a good
yeah,
idea.
she says that's 72. Every time I talk to her, she swears that it is 72, but I'm like, it does not feel 72. Like,
No, this feels more like about 65.
That's the picture.
Yeah, it says 61. We're gonna go with that. That's what it feels like. It's so cold.
Is that what it's saying?
June 6th.
Oh, okay.
Wednesday. 71.8 degrees.
Oh my goodness, it's
I don't-
lying.
I don't believe that. I just don't. Either that or I'm sitting right in. I am sitting right in the breeze, and so are you guys.
Yeah, I know. Well, where are we supposed to sit that's not in the breeze then? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In the middle.
It is an issue.
Yeah, it's just so cold.
Yeah.
It's because it's so hot during the day when I'm working and I'm sweating, and then my whole body's sweaty. All right, I work at Grease Monkey. It's a very dirty job, but it doesn't matter. Very icky and sweaty, and then I come here, it's like freezes. It's like the Eskimo thing where you're not supposed to wear too many clothes. So you freeze it down.
Yeah. Well, you'll bring a jacket.
I know.
Really, literally.
90 degrees, and I'm still
Yeah.
throwing my jacket
I know.
around.
Break time, I have this on them. Warm.
Well, yeah, that is a complaint we have. So anyway, comments. Do you have anything you'd like to say about your experiences with nonverbal communication?
Well, you were talking a little bit earlier if we come from sales or anything. So the only reason why I entered into this industry was through my car salesman experience. That's what got me through the door. And that's why I am where I am. And I actually thought a lot about returning back to the car sales because I really, really, really enjoyed the industry a lot. certain parts of it because there's so much of that industry that's really, really terrible and shicey, horrible. I worked at Tynan's, and Tynan's was the downfall of it. Because when I first worked as a car salesman, I worked in Loveland at Loveland Car Guys, and it's this nice, really small car lot, just family owned. So it was just, and I got into a lot of the business side of it. This is really why I have a passion for being in business, in this business program, and why I want to own a business one day, because I've seen all the ins and outs and the back ends of that business, and I really enjoyed all of it, and seeing like how we finance our own customers and everything. But I really enjoyed being a salesman, and it taught me a lot about communication, because I wasn't super great communicator before my experience as a car salesman. I learned a lot of confidence that way.
Yeah. Well, in order to sell anything, you have to be able to communicate. There are a very, very few products that you don't need to be a good salesman to sell. And those products are things like, nobody really has to sell the Microsoft Windows operating system because they have a lock on the market.
Yeah. Nobody advertises for that, really.
Yeah.
They already know.
Right.
They're already the king.
Right. So if you wanted to come up with a new operating system, it would have to be something that had a distinct advantage that you could market. One of my neighbors in North Carolina was the head of IBM's project to develop their own operating system. Because, Bill Gates sort of forced Windows onto IBM. He bluffed them because they could not get a good operating system going for their small computers, and Windows worked on it. And so they always had this idea that they would just take advantage of this kid, Bill Gates, and his partner, Paul Allen, and so forth. They figured they would just take advantage of them because they were IBM. They just steamroller them. Gates bluffed him into basically using it on everything. And then they put together this project to develop their own operating system. And it failed. They could not make an operating system that was stable. As bad as Windows was, their system would not work. Now, I'll give Microsoft kudos for finally getting their act together on getting a system that's stable. They've had many troubles over the years. Windows 10 actually is a pretty good operating system. But it even took them 20 years to get a really good, stable system. But IBM, with all their money and all their expertise, could not do it. And they finally dropped that whole project, fired a whole cadre of people that had been hired for that one specific task. You cannot sell. There are rare products that sell themselves. Yeah. And cars are especially hard to sell because nobody trusts a car salesman.
That's the biggest thing, yeah.
I mean, to be honest,
Yeah.
when we bought our Subaru, we were replacing my Camry, which died at 230,000 miles. Broke my heart. I love that car. Yeah. And I wanted it to go 300. But anyway, so when we got lucky and got a really good salesman when we bought the Subaru, because we went to a place that did not commission their car salesmen. They were all salary. So he had no impetus to upsell us. Nothing that would benefit him to upsell us. And so he got us the car we wanted. And so my experience with that was probably one of the best car sales experiences I've had. Yeah. And none of the, I need to go talk to my supervisor and see if I can sell you the car for that price.
Yeah, that's
garbage.
Nonsense. I hated the fact that they split at when I went over to Tynan's, the job that I did all in one was all of a sudden the job of 5 different people. You know, where and all of them, each individually, it's their job to upsell the customer too. You know what I mean? So not only is the main salesman trying to upsell you, but then there's the finance guy trying to sell you the warranty. Then there's you know what I mean. There's all this horse shit, if you ask me. But you know, the key difference is I think is listening to the customer's needs, and that's what I really enjoyed about being in the Car Guys. Was we were such a good company that cared about our customers, and we had a really, really good customer relations. That all of our customers, they paid off their car, they traded it back into us and bought a new car. They were our customers for life. They had, it was amazing the way that we were trying to build that business, you know. I don't know, it grew a lot in that year that I was there, and it was just amazing. I think that if I had control over it, it would still be running, but I left and they're no longer there. Shut down, and I can tell you exactly why, because the son and the father that ran it, the son has no communication skills, no social skills whatsoever, but he's numbers oriented 100% all the way. He's the business. And then the dad, total bullshitter, best salesman ever. Could talk to you about nothing for days. You know what I mean? He was awesome, but he had no business sense whatsoever. You know, and I could tell that he just kind of took over a little bit too much, and that's what happened to the business, because they needed to work together because they filled each other's faults, you know. But it's so important to be able to have both of those. You know? Yeah.
Key in any business.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
The lady that's out on maternity leave right now, it's weird. She's in Canada and I'm here. She gets a year maternity leave, but she would not communicate with me sometimes. And now, 6 months later, after she's been out for a while, I'm finding these little things where it's like, if she would have just told me, I could have dealt with that months ago. But now it's coming up, and now I have to fix it, and it's a big ordeal.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
communication.
Yep.
I think, especially like in my position with, I do chemical purchasing for crops in all of Canada. And so everybody who I directly work with is in Canada. If I don't communicate with them, there's nothing there.
No.
Yeah. That's across the whole country. That's across the border.
Yeah.
A lot of communication needs to go there. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yep.
That's terrible that she doesn't have any communication. But a year maternity leave, she coming back?
Supposedly, but as far as I know, nobody wants her back. So because of the lack of communication, it's mine, and she wouldn't make it.
She didn't want to train anybody else to fill her position, but she's leaving for a year.
Yeah.
Well, does Canada have a year's maternity leave then? Okay, because that's
That's
what a lot of Europe has.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because in Europe, they have so much more available, and they also have for the men. The men get maternity.
Well, in Denmark,
They
it's
get
a
6
year.
weeks.
It's a year for the parents. Not
Okay.
both of them. Not both of them at the same time, or they can each take 6 months together,
Oh, really? That's
or they can have a year. But
Like the
yeah,
mom can have a
total.
year,
The
yeah.
mom can have a year. Or the mom can have 6 months, and then the dad 6 months.
Yeah.
One way or another.
wow.
And the unfortunate side effect of that, this is what my daughter has discovered, is that young women of childbearing age have the hardest time getting a job because the employers don't want them to be gone for that year. So that is
Okay,
that was an unplanned side effect of that rule.
I guess it makes it more unreliable. But granted, when you're stuck, okay, so I am considered more unreliable as a worker simply because I'm a single parent.
For your single mother, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's total horseshit.
Yeah.
But there's nothing you can do about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, we
Nothing.
have a lot of, and communication, again, is the key. If they sat down and got to know you, they would realize that you don't fit that stereotype, therefore it's irrelevant.
Yeah.
The problem is we set up stereotypes.
Yeah.
And you know, we just, we don't know how to deal with them to not have them.
Well, we
So-
let them dictate our lives and our decisions and our judgment that we make just automatically. When we all think that we don't judge, but we all judge just on a
Yeah.
general basis. You know,
Yeah.
that's what we do. That's what we're designed to do. We're supposed to look for dangers, assess everything around us.
Mhm.
That's judging. You know
It
what I
is.
mean?
It is.
I really would have liked to hear maternity leave. though.
I know.
Yeah.
My son was in my office with me within a month after having,
Oh my
because
goodness.
I had to go back to work to do payroll. I was the only one that knew how to do it.
And did they have any trouble with you having your son in the office with you?
No, because I had my own office, so I could close the door when needed. And my boss, she was really cool. She would just grab him up and change his diaper on the conference room table right outside her office.
See, that's another way of dealing with
So-
it too, is to have coworkers who are willing to understand that it does take a village to raise a child. And, you know, Memorial Day, we had 40 people at our house. And 13 of them were teenagers and younger, down to little Claire, who was about yay tall and 2 years old. And it was just really nice to watch this entire group of adults just making sure that the kids were safe and taken care of. And the kids felt that and felt extremely comfortable with all these strangers. They could feel that the attitude was, oh, you're important. And we're going to take care of you. They could feel it. And when kids have that, they're much more well-adjusted adults. So, you know, I'm pleased for you. You had that kind of support. So anyway, it's about time to go. In fact, it's past time. We'll come back on Monday and we'll start off with our presentations, little speech. The rest of it, just again, the way the assessment is set up, you've got 4 questions to answer, and you've got, you got plenty of time to do it. So you do, when you have time, do it. Work on it. And I think, obviously we did the in-class activity. The rest of it is basically the readings and the videos. So I will see you all on Monday evening. Have a good weekend. And for those of you who actually watch the video, I want you to send me an email with a code word. And the code word is going to be Thailand, Thailand. See you Monday.